Thank you for attending the final presentation for Class CM 7010 Research Methods with Dr. Wang. My name is Jacob Sanabia, and my research is on methods of sharing the best practices to increase productivity in the construction industry. Construction productivity is stagnant within the industry. Over the past 20 years, global productivity has increased 2.8%. Manufacturing productivity has exceeded that, although construction has only increased 1% over that same time. Now, construction companies agree that we need to do better. Now, there is a way to increase productivity across the entire spectrum of the construction industry. And that is the purpose of this study, is to get the result of increasing productivity in construction. A plan for implementing a solution is going to be given, and the solution is at the management level, and it's intended for project managers and schedulers, not necessarily for the trades. The solution and implementation plan is going to be presented to general contracting companies, and we're also going to study the willingness of those companies to implement the plan. So the hypothesis that we're working with is that construction companies see the need to improve productivity and want to improve the construction industry as a whole. The construction industry is going to improve, of course, as our productivity improves. Now, the issue is that companies in the past have not been willing to share their best practices with their competitors. Of course, they're worried about losing your competitive advantage and having other companies get work that you are going after. So that's why companies have been very reluctant to share their successes and how they've been successful with the industry as a whole. And the result of all that is that productivity doesn't increase because the knowledge of how to do something better specifically stays within one company and doesn't get spread out throughout the industry. So the research objective is to find a way for companies to safely share those best practices, which is going to improve productivity within the construction industry. The way I'm proposing that this is done is that research threats are the proposed solution as a way where companies can safely share their best practices among other professionals, which will collectively benefit the entire construction industry. So we started off our research with a literature review. I'm going to highlight just 4 of the sources that we used. You can look at the references to get the rest and to get a more broader overview, but this is just a quick overview. So the first article that we studied was Major Barriers of Information Sharing and Reverse Logistics of Construction and Demolition Waste. Now, the purpose of this study was to analyze the interrelationships of barriers of information, and then it talked about various techniques of how you can use a methodology to break through those barriers. They showed how to develop a matrix and with independent surveys and how those work. The next one we studied was developing safety cooperation in construction. Now, the objective of this study was to discover if it's better to change the safety culture in construction by enforcement or to do it by engagement. Again, observations and interviews were mostly used. The next article was Communication, Coordination, and Cooperation in Construction Projects, Business Environments, and Human Behaviors. Now, the objective of that one was to assess construction project risks by using the fault tree analysis and event tree analysis, which is something that will be used in the research threats that we conduct to consolidate the ideas and the best practices and be able to present them back out. And then lastly, charrettes as a method for engaging industry and best practices research. This is kind of what started the whole research project. The objective is to explain the benefits of charrettes and also how those can be applied. And then we tailored that and cleaned it up so that it can be used for a construction charrette to get best practices. So our research plans, what are we going to do? So the main crux of our study is going to be charrettes. We've done some research and come up with a sample size of 5 to 7 general or construction companies that we're going to invite. The number is large enough to get a variety of ideas and best practices, and it's also small enough so that it's realistic in getting funding and actually being able to convince people and get them to attend the weekend or during the week. So the first part of the research that we're going to need to do, even before the charrette, is a deep dive is going to need to go into local markets and companies that compete for the same work. Because of the competitive nature of construction of the local and regional markets, we need to make sure that those companies aren't competing for the same work because they're not going to show up and they're not going to be willing to share their best practices. Now, an important note that I wanted to make was that this research is not hypothetical or theoretical. It is going to be used to make concrete plans and have realistic outcomes that are expected for people to implement and to work. Now, the first day of the charrette is on day one. We're going to open up with an introduction. We're going to talk about the importance of increasing productivity of the construction industry, how to build the construction industry at large, and then also narrowing that down so that it'll benefit each company that's attending. Moral and ethics in the business execution of construction are going to be discussed. They're not the focus, but we always want to make sure that we're talking about the business and ethics of our industry. Also, questionnaires are going to be passed out, and these are going to be filled out, and these will focus on best practices and ideas that companies have and are using. So that night, the data is going to be analyzed and compiled so that we have an idea of what the best practices are and the way the program is heading. And then the next day, we're going to have some semi-structured interviews with each of the companies. And that's going to help us to further narrow down the best practices and ideas. Then the last day, we're going to have roundtable discussions on which best practices have worked, kind of what everybody has in common, what's different. So all that information is going to be ironed out. And then also toward the end of that day, we're going to have all the information compiled and presented and distributed to each participant. Now, just quick note there, to get all the data analyzed and summarized and presented, a few key players are going to be part of the research team. There's going to be a team lead, principal researcher, principal interviewer, and discussion coordinator. And then the written part of this report dives in a lot deeper on what are the roles and responsibilities of each of those positions. So preliminary results and expected outcome. So the preliminary results from the literature review show that there is definitely a need to increase productivity in construction, but it also has shown, a bit surprising, is that companies are willing to work and to share their best practices to benefit the construction industry or for the greater good of the industry. The caveat of that is that as long as it does not affect their ability to secure work and make a profit. So the data is going to be narrowed, excuse me, it's going to be narrowed down to 1 or 2 best practices from each of the attending construction companies. Using design charrettes to get these best practices and distribute them, we believe is the best way to conduct this research and to get it to be realistically to be finished. So the broader impact of the research. One thing I did want to note before we go into the broader impact is that the ideas and best practices, they are expected to be implemented, that these companies will take other people's best practices, implement them on their jobs, and then that will be kind of the results or whether or not the research was successful. So the broader impact is that we do expect construction industry wide productivity to increase. With more productivity means you should be able to accomplish more work in the same amount of time, which should realize in a higher profit margin for the companies that are participated and eventually for the industry as a whole. I do want to say that follow-up studies will be needed to be conducted based off of this research in the design charrette. Once the plans are implemented, so we do expect this increase in productivity, but we also have to actually research and find out whether or not it truly worked, this process. And if it didn't, we'll need to go back to the drawing board and press forward. So that is some follow-up research that does need to be done. So I want to thank you for listening to our research plan, and just a couple quick acknowledgements. I just want to thank some people there who have helped with this research and the ideas and hashing it out, and for their advice and their support and their encouragement. Thank you.